I guess if you want to, you can go ahead and call this a review, but this is really just a wish list for Grand Theft Auto 5. Some of the features I want to see in Grand Theft Auto 5 that I thought, upon reflection, Grand Theft Auto 4 sort of lacked. Basically, I really loved Grand Theft Auto 4 when it came out 5 years ago. I thought it was just a great game overall, but the one thing I didn't care for, the two things I didn't care for actually, were the story and the graphics back then, which I'll get into. But I thought it was a really good game. But now, after playing Saints Row 2 extensively and just sort of noticing how many features that game had, and then sort of going back into this game when I hadn't played it for a couple years, I just sort of noticed that I overlooked a few different things that I didn't notice before. So the first thing is that the story, like I said before, I was never really a big fan of the story here. Basically, it's just like he's an immigrant and he's going to New York City, or Liberty City, as the game calls it, and he's trying to make a new life for himself. I mean, the beginning part of the story is fine because it's you trying to rise up with your cousin or whatnot, but I mean, I think the story sort of dragged on a bit throughout the course of the game, especially like the middle and end sequences, because there's essentially the whole story structure, or at least the mission structure, is kind of repetitive, because you basically work for some guy and you do like 4 missions for him, and then you end up like you meet some other guy and he tells you to kill him, and then you just start working for the next guy and do another 4 missions. Basically, all the people you work for, or most of them at least, get killed off over the course of the game, and it just sort of becomes repetitive. And the other big thing is that I just didn't really give a shit about many of the characters in the game, aside from maybe Nico and Roman, and then there's just one girl named, I can't remember what her name is, but you meet her about halfway through. But I mean, in general, most of the characters here are just sort of obnoxious and exaggerated in terms of their behavior, and I really just didn't care for them at all. They weren't interesting to me, they didn't appeal to me at all. I mean, I'm not going to slam I think the voice acting is definitely well done. It's just I didn't get attached to the characters at all. And I think this is something both Red Dead Redemption as well as Max Payne 3 sort of did better, at least, than this game did. In that I was actually more, engaged and attached to the characters and sort of what was going on. I cared more about the story. And in this game, I mean, like the beginning, third of the game has a pretty good story, I felt, but where the antagonist sort of gets introduced. But then after that, he doesn't really reappear throughout the game. You sort of get distracted by that because there's just so many different people you work for that it just becomes hard to keep track of. And then there's also the whole thing with all your buddies are just sort of obnoxious. I didn't really much care for those people at all. So that's basically that aspect of it. And so I mean, the story in this game, it had good voice acting and whatnot, but I just didn't care for it at all. And now there's this whole the whole buddy system or whatever, where you have to like go to your buddies your friends call you up on your cell phone and then ask you to go do something with them. And that just sort of became really annoying. It became sort of a hassle. I think there's some sort of sleep mode on your cell phone where you could sort of not take where the calls don't come through until you turn it back on. But I mean, it just sort of became a hassle compared to something like Saints Row 2, where you call them up in combat. Here, you don't really have any combat buddies except for I think one guy. But other than that, I mean, it just sort of I don't know. These people they don't help you out in combat really, and they just sort of become a hassle to have to do that. They call you at the most inconvenient times imaginable, like during missions or during firefights or whatnot, and it just sort of becomes repetitive. I felt that aspect of the game that should be optional. It shouldn't be forced upon you every so often. Every hour or whatever, however often these people call you. I just felt that aspect of the game just sort of became repetitive, and I hope in Grand Theft Auto 5 they definitely make that optional or just cut that out entirely. The next thing is that there's the lack of character customization. You can customize Nico's clothes to some extent, but they're all sort of like pre-made outfits. So essentially, the outfit you see in this video, like that track sweater or whatever this is, that blue track sweater and like track pants. Basically, there's like 2 or 3 outfits where the only thing that changes is the color. but you don't really get to. It's nothing like Saints Row 2's system where you get to choose all like the colors and how to wear it and whatnot. Here it's basically you get like 2, maybe 3 options of the same suit or the same type of clothing, and you just choose between like blue, red, and green probably, or something along those lines. And also you get to choose, your sunglasses and your shoes. But other than that, it's quite limited, I think, in terms of customization. I don't think you could even wear hats in this game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe you can. And there's not really that many different clothing stores to shop from. So I mean, it's just sort of, I don't know. I think that's sort of a strong aspect of Saints Row 2 that this game sort of lacked. And basically for your cribs, there's no car garage that you have for your cribs like Saints Row, where you could sort of store almost as many as you want really in there. I know, and that sort of becomes a problem with Grand Theft Auto 4's, attempt at realism. I mean, I think they sort of how Saints Row the Third went so far in the silliness direction. This one sort of went a little bit too far in the seriousness direction, or not even the seriousness direction. I don't really give a shit if the story's serious or not, but the realism direction. I felt they tried too hard to make not the story, but the gameplay sort of really realistic, and as a result, it didn't come off quite as fun. And basically, yeah, so you can only store 2 cars each per crib. And another thing that really pissed me off is that during the main story mission, about halfway through, you get a choice between killing 2 guys, and if you kill one guy who happens to be like your best buddy, if you decide to kill the other guy, and you also get the other guy's crib, but you have no idea that that's going to happen. So I thought that was sort of a bad thing to leave up to chance. And basically, so that I just don't appreciate the fact that you can't have that many cars in the game as well. Just because some of those cars, like the Lamborghini, are very rare. So if you want to pick up a bunch of them, you can't store them anywhere, because you can only have up to like 6 or 8 cars depending on how many cribs you have. I think there's like 4 or 5 in the game, 5 including if you take that guy's crib. But so I mean, I think that's sort of limited. The next thing, one of the biggest problems I have is that you earn a lot of money throughout the course of the game, but there's really not much to spend it on at all. Like, you can't buy cars. The only thing, you could also, you have cheats, obviously, so you could get, your Ferrari or whatever. You could get a lot of the good cars, besides the Lamborghini, with cheats, so that's a good thing. Cheats are what make this game really fun. But, yeah, you could do that, but, I mean, I just felt there's nothing, like, you can't buy cribs in this game. You can't really buy, aside from clothing or whatnot, there's really nothing in-game to spend your money on, aside from that and weapons. But if you have cheats on, there's nothing really that you could spend money on in the game. And so when I beat the game, I had almost about $1 million, or maybe like $800,000 or $900,000, somewhere around that range. And I had like nothing to spend it on. I don't want to spend it on, and nothing significant to spend it on, I should say. I mean, clothes in a game probably don't cost that much, a few $100s, and also, like, if you take your friends out to do something like an activity, that only costs like $50 or $100 or something. So none of this stuff is that substantial. So that was sort of bad. And basically, yeah, like, you can't, not only can you not buy cribs, but I also felt a lacking feature is the fact that I told you all those guys that you work for sort of get killed off, and some of them live in pretty fancy houses. You can't use those houses as cribs. I mean, you can't even enter them at all. Like some of the places you go in, where you visit during cutscenes and the interior stuff. I wish you could do that in this game, so there's more interior stuff. Where, like, in the cutscenes, where if you're visiting someone in their house, you can actually go inside the house, but you can't do that. But you also can't, acquire their crib after they've died, which I think would have been a nice feature, because that would have added at least a solid 2 or 3 more cribs that are actually like the really, really super nice. And I think that would have been awesome. The next thing is that that I noticed in 2008 is that the graphics are definitely a bit of a mixed bag. They're definitely nothing fantastic at all. I do think the car effects, like the damage effects on the cars, look really great. But the trees, I think, are the worst part of the graphics. The trees just look terrible upon close inspection. And I realize that the world itself is quite large. It is really large, so it's hard to make, great graphics. Given the scope and size of the city. Like Skyrim, for example, didn't have the greatest graphics. I think they were a step up from this game, but still. But I mean, I think they definitely could have been a bit better. You know, the color scheme in the campaign during the day sometimes is a bit drab. It's sort of like dark and rainy, so the color palette in this game isn't all that great. And at night, the game looks almost a little bit cartoony. And I don't think the character models are that, or at least the faces are that great at all on the pedestrians when you're walking by or whatnot. But yeah, so there's that. And in terms of the gameplay, the cover system I think is definitely serviceable, but it feels a bit stiff and sluggish compared to something like Gears of War or even the Rainbow Six games, specifically Rainbow Six Vegas 2. It's just not fluid. It's just not like efficient. You know, you don't really move very fast. I mean, and I don't know. I just felt it could have been, you know, better. You know, the cover system could have been better. It could have been more efficient. It could have been something a little bit more fun, where I felt like you could control you know, your movement a little bit better, especially on that lock-on system. That I didn't care for, actually, the lock-on system where you can lock onto someone. I mean, you could turn that feature off, so that helps a lot, because it's sort of annoying to have to switch. The switching between the people that you're locking onto isn't all that great. And finally, the driving at times feels a bit too slippery. It feels like you're almost on ice sometimes, sort of like what Whitey the reviewer complained about. I mean, I don't think the driving's bad at all, but I definitely feel like most of the cars aren't very fast. Even some of the like the Ferraris or the Lamborghinis, they take quite a while to actually accelerate all the way up to their maximum speed. So a lot of the times you're not going to be, you don't feel like you're going very fast in the cars compared to something like Saints Row 2, where even Saints Row 3, all the Saints Row games really, where the cars, most of them, like even like some of those shitty cars feel like they go at a decent speed. In this game, even like some of the sports cars feel like you go fast at the maximum speed, but it takes a while to get there, and then the rest of them just don't feel like they go fast at all. So those are basically my main complaints about Grand Theft Auto 4. A lot of them I didn't really notice that well at the beginning, but I hope they definitely improve. It feels like most of these points are going to be addressed in Grand Theft Auto 5. And I don't want you to get the sense that this game is bad or anything like that, because this is still, you know, one of the better games on the Xbox 360. Because I really love the multiplayer of this game. It's really fun. It's a blast. It's a blast, and plus, it's one thing Saints Row 2 lacked, in that Saints Row 2, the competitive multiplayer was sort of interior, wasn't like across the entire city, and that would have made Saints Row 2 like, you know, even better than it already was. But in this game, that's one thing that this game has over Saints Row 2, that it has that feature. So that's really great. But I mean, I don't want you to get the sense that, you know, this is a bad game, because I still really like it. But I just think it goes down. It's definitely not a 10 out of 10 game for me. It's more like an 8.5, I would say, just because all those flaws sort of you know, accumulate into something that, you know, I feel like there's a lot of, you know, missed opportunities here, or a lot of potential that this game could have had. But obviously the multiplayer is really fun, and the city itself, New York City, is really great to explore. This is a great game to check out, obviously, because there's a lot of side activities to do. A lot of the missions are quite fun. But other than that, yeah, I mean, we're just gonna have to wait for Grand Theft Auto 5 to see what's in store for us next. But yeah, so this is sort of like a half review-ish, half wish list, sort of pointing out the flaws. I mean, I just don't want you to get the idea. While this video is sort of negatively focusing on the aspects of Grand Theft Auto 4, the game as a whole is still really very good. So yeah, that basically wraps up this video. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next, but whatever. So if you haven't gotten this game, get it right now, and let's hope Grand Theft Auto 5 is great.